Welcome back to the alcohol-free revolution. My name is Steve Smith,
And I'm James Lloyd.
and we are both alcohol-free coaches, chewing the fat over alcohol-free lifestyle. And a little bit of a disclaimer, really, this week, James, with August coming round and you celebrating your big milestone of hitting the big 5-0, and I'm not going to let that slip. Um, Last couple of episodes we've kind of pre-recorded because I've been away with the family. It's been a bit of a busy August, and now we are back and fresh. And this is probably take number three of trying to get this off the ground because we're a little bit rusty around the edges, but it's all good. How's your last couple of weeks been, James?
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Let's be honest. This is the first time we've actually recorded in what, 3 or 4 weeks? You've been away traveling the world. I've been away in the States. So, I guess for continuity for the listeners, the last 4 episodes you would have listened to, we basically recorded those in the space of about 10 days. So we've not spoken for nearly a month. So I'm super excited to be back with you, Steve. We're coming up to where are we now? 27th of August we're recording. So we're coming up to September. And yeah, it's been a really roller coaster start to the pod. We've had 7 episodes so far. Listenership's growing. We've had some really fantastic feedback and yeah, really excited to get going again.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I just want to say to anybody who's left us a review to date, thank you so much. It really helps with our listenership. If that's not a word you can say very easily with a big mug of tea in your hand. But yeah, it's really helped with us. And anybody who leaves us a review, thank you for doing so. And it's helping us really grow the pod going forward. But yeah, cutting back to August, yeah, busy month so far, and great to be back on. I'm back and alive after deciding that it was a good idea to take a family of four and a dog on a 2,500 mile road trip around Europe in a motorhome with no air conditioning at 37 degrees. So I feel very rested. How about yourself?
Yeah, very good. I've been over in Pittsburgh seeing some of my family, and yeah, celebrating my 50th, which is really nice. Had some nice messages, and yeah, coming up 4 years alcohol free for me as well. That's just on the horizon actually. It's in a couple of weeks' time. It's the 3rd of September, so where are we now? 27th of August. So yeah, maybe we'll talk about that in the next episode. But yeah, time's flying by.
Exciting times. We've got some really big episodes coming up as well. So watch this space. We've got some exciting guests coming on the podcast over the next few weeks, which we will keep quiet for the moment, but really looking forward to moving forward with that. So what do we want to talk about this week, James?
Well, I think one of the big things that I hear an awful lot about whenever we're talking about alcohol with coaching clients is stress. And a lot of people using alcohol to de-stress at the end of the day, to sort of switch off and unwind. And I think as a spin-off from that, one of the things that, well, probably the biggest benefit of going alcohol free, which is related to stress, is sleep. Sleep is such a huge topic, and from a health perspective, it really sits at the top of the tree in terms of, benefits of going alcohol free or even just taking a break. And I thought we'd dig into stress and sleep a bit more today, Steve.
That sounds great, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's probably the most discussed topic I have in the early stages of coaching,
Mm.
particularly as you say, that de-stress, that kind of shift from work to home, and the limiting belief that we have that actually, when I finish a busy, stressful day at work, I need that glass of wine or I need that cold beer to kind of make that switch or make that shift, whether it's at home or whether it's stopping at the train station on the way home or grabbing a beer as you're kind of making that transition. And it's probably the biggest question I have coming up in the early stages, as I said, where people really want to, they feel they need that. Is that something that resonates with yourself as well?
Yeah, well, what you're talking about there is the ritual, right? So that kind of finishing a stressful day at work, getting home, going in the fridge, opening a beer. It's that ritual, and one of the things that I think is really key to moving away from dependence on alcohol is keeping that ritual still alive, but replacing it with something else because it's a habit loop. For anyone who's not aware of how habit loops work, we have a cue, we have a routine, and we have a reward. And that cue could be, getting home from work. And then the routine is I open a beer, and the reward is I feel relaxed. And that habit loop gets locked into our brains and it just gets more powerful and more stronger. And effectively our brain says to us, well, that was good. I'm going to do that again. And you can change that loop. You can just change what the reward is. So the cue is still going to be there. You're still going to get home at the end of the day, and feel stressed. But if you take out that beer, and you replace it with an alcohol-free alternative, or perhaps you go for a walk, or you do something else, but you break up that routine. And that's really one of the things that's kind of key to moving away from, having to have a drink every time you come home, or whatever the situation might be. It might be watching a football match. I used to find that whenever I switched on Sky Sports to sit down and watch the football, immediately I'd be like, I want to have a beer, because football was a trigger. So that's one of the things I think that's really, really important, is looking at your habits and looking at your behaviors and really understanding what's going on. And I think if you can really understand yourself a little bit more, a lot better, then you can make really positive change.
How do you remember, as you say, coming up to 4 years, do you remember how your habits were formed, or what habits were kind of at the forefront of your mind and kind of drove your drinking?
I'm not even sure that you can, because habits are something. I've been reading quite a lot about habits recently, actually, a book by a guy called Charles Duhigg, who's called The Power of Habit. It's not dissimilar to Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is another really
Yeah,
fantastic
great
book.
book.
But it, we are our habits are what make us human. 90% of what we do is automated. If we didn't have habits, then we don't have the capacity to think about absolutely everything we do. We don't think about the process of brushing our teeth. We don't think about the process of driving. Once once that behavior is locked in, it is done automatically. And that frees up our cognitive space to be able to go and do other things. So habits, we have very simple habits and very complex habits. But once that pathway is installed, in our brain, it almost happens on, it's completely automated. And these things form, very, very easily. And over time, they become absolutely entrenched. And if you think about something like alcohol, certainly in our experience, we did it for the best part of 3 decades. So that habit is incredibly entrenched, and it will always be there. But the thing that that I do in coaching, I know it's something that you do as well, is bringing those habits out of the subconscious into the conscious. So it's something that people become aware of what they're doing. And the key to any kind of behavior change, it all starts with awareness,
Mm.
and kind of stopping that automation. Um,
Yeah,
and it
go on, sorry.
There you go.
I often use the example of, and you're so right, where habits are formed so young. And the basic example I say often is, do you ever think about turning on a light switch when you come into a room and it's dark? You don't even give it a second thought. That's a habit that's been formed in you since you were a baby. But you wouldn't have had that thought when you walk in, but you see that it's dark, you see that someone switches on a light switch, you see that it's light, and you get that reward, albeit a very small reward. So it's something that becomes so simple and so ingrained in it that we don't even think about it. And like you said, 30 plus years of drinking, the reward is, what I've had such a day. So what do? We grab a drink. My reward was always meetings in London, which normally fell on a Tuesday, which is kind of a day I would make rules around when I could or couldn't drink, but that's when I would then break them. What's the reward? Oh, we've had a busy old meeting at work today. It's gone on all day. Let's all go to the pub. So we'd go to the pub, and then the train's delayed. So I'll have a beer at the station. So it became such a habit, and a habit of being in the big city and seeing the big lights and having a few drinks, whereas I used to work in the city when I was younger, and I would associate it with that. So it all just ties in together. And I thought that the thought of ever going to London for a meeting and then going home straight after just never even clicked. And it took time for me to work on that habit and break that habit. Like anything you say though, habits can totally and utterly be broken. You can break them at any stage in that loop by
Yeah,
replacing it with something else.
it's all about awareness. This is the thing where people beating themselves up about, I've not got any willpower, or I don't have the discipline. It really isn't about that. The reason we crave alcohol is because of these habit loops. And I hear people talk a lot about not having an off switch, and all these kind of things. It's Once you really understand what is going on in the brain around alcohol, it has nothing to do with willpower. But everybody goes into taking a break from alcohol or going alcohol free, trying to white knuckle it and trying to do it purely on willpower alone. And unfortunately, that is often doomed to failure, because you
Mm.
have to understand what's going on in the brain. and I'm going to do a very slight plug here, please forgive me. But I've been recently been doing a video series on my website called "Alcohol in the Brain: How to Master Your Mindset," where I really drill into a lot of these sort of subjects, around cravings, around how the dopamine system works and how alcohol hijacks our reward system. Talk a lot about stress and cortisol, and anxiety, the nervous system, all these kind of things. If people are interested in learning a bit more about how alcohol in the brain works, then if you go to the free resources section on my website, which is alcoholfreecoach.com, you'll see a series of videos that I'm dropping every single week, where we talk a lot about this, and understanding more about what's happening in the brain around alcohol is, really absolutely key. But today we were going to talk a bit more about sort of stress and about sleep. I mean, were you somebody that used alcohol to relieve stress? Were you? I personally wasn't. Stress wasn't really a big driver for me. It was a lot more about the social side, but it is a big one for a lot of people. What's your experience with stress?
Yeah, it was. I didn't think I did, but now, four and a bit years down the line, I guess I did, and I think actually I would use the. It's interesting you say there's stress and the social aspect. I used both together.
Mm.
So, giving you that example in London, that I would think I was socializing with work colleagues and going out drinking and kind of de-stressing after work. So I had a balance across the both. But only once I stepped away from it, I realized, yeah, I probably was using that to deal with stress. It wasn't something I would mass. I wouldn't. I don't. Didn't consciously go, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. Let me grab a drink. That wasn't it. But actually, now looking back and seeing it from the other side, yeah, totally. That's exactly what I was doing, to kind of wind down. But what are we winding down from? We're winding down from stress. So yeah, absolutely, that was something that I did.
I think it's one thing that William Porter talks a lot about in Alcohol Explained, and it's a real revelation once you understand this, is the idea of alcohol is only removing the stress that it put there in the first place. Um, and I think probably the better example of this, which is more of a clear example, but that people can understand, relate to, and understand, is smoking. If you're a 20 a day smoker and you can't have a cigarette for a day, you're so like, oh, I need a fag, I need a cigarette, and then you have that cigarette and you're like, oh, feels great, and it's such a great example of how you only feel that it's only relieving the stress of the smoking that it created in the first place. And alcohol
Mm.
is no different. It's a drug. It's the same thing. So, when you feel a craving, you're going through mild withdrawal. Is effectively what is happening. That's what a craving is. Is your brain is telling you that you need something, and it's reacting to the withdrawal from the previous drinking. Even if you're drinking relatively modest amounts, whether it's you know 2 or 3 times a week, you're still going through a withdrawal cycle every time you have a period where you're not drinking. And that's basically what's creating the stress. So once you get out of that routine where you're not drinking day in, day out, all of a sudden your levels raise and the stress is gone, because physiologically alcohol is out of our system within about 5 days. So once you get past that, you all you have left then is the psychological side, is the mental um, association with alcohol. There's no physical symptoms, there's no physical craving.
It's exactly that. I mean, our brain chemistry is normally in when we're in a normal state is completely balanced, and that's how our brains like to be. And it was interesting you saying there a little earlier about the kind of science behind it, but without going into too much detail and just kind of skipping across. You're only really getting relief for that sort of 20 minutes. You're absolutely
Yeah,
right, because
yeah,
you're
yeah. 100%.
obviously you kind of boost your GABA, which makes you kind of relax and calm down, and then that then triggers the dopamine in your brain, which gets you excited and makes you, and everything just becomes unbalanced. So without you have that first drink of the that reward after work, and it does feel good. It does. It's 20
Yeah,
minutes of
yeah,
like,
there's no
oh
getting away
wow,
from
great. But then where do you feel 20 minutes later? Because your alcohol level falls, glutamate suddenly comes back, so then you start getting that. Your brain tries to level itself out. So what do you want to do? You want to chase that feeling of that first drink. That's why that phrase, just going to go for one, never happens, or
it.
certainly never happened with me. It's a myth. One beer
Yeah,
does not exist.
yeah, that's exactly the same. Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on as well. And it's, I have whenever I speak with people that I work with, and one of the first things that people say is, alcohol, helps me release stress. But that's factually incorrect because it is, it's increasing cortisol in our system, which is a stress hormone. So we may have the perception that it's relieving stress, but you hit on it there. You're absolutely spot on. It's for 20 minutes. We do have, once alcohol hits our system, it stimulates our dopamine receptors for about 20 minutes. And then, you commented it on there, our bodies are always trying to get into balance, into homeostasis, hormone balance. And once our systems recognize there's too much dopamine in our system, they release a counterbalance, which is called dynorphin, which is a chemical which basically is effectively an anti, is yeah, effectively anti-dopamine, which brings it back into balance. But our systems find it very difficult to establish how much is required, and the dynorphin that's in our system normally tends to be there for about 8 to 10 hours. So even when the alcohol's long gone, cleared from our system, we've still got the dynorphin, which is essentially bringing our mood down.
Mm,
Which, if you're drinking at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, it's, the dynorphin's still in your system the next morning, which is
that's
what's
it.
driving that anxiety and
Yeah,
that anxiety the next day, which makes you feel really anxious. And I think when you start to understand all of this stuff that's going on in the brain, that's when you get a slightly different perspective on it. You start to understand what's coming the next day for that 20 minutes. And you've spoken about it on previous episodes, this idea of withdrawing time from the next day. Once you start to see it in that different perspective, it really does make you think, yeah, do I really need that glass of wine with dinner?
yeah,
And I guess that brings us on to sleep, which, again is the big myth, around, well, I used to think that alcohol was really important for me to get to sleep. You'd have a few beers, you just pass out, you wake up the next day, brilliant, had a fantastic night's sleep. But
yeah.
and I know it's not a fantastic night's sleep, it's a horrendous night's sleep.
It's truly awful. I mean, this one of my favorite subjects, talking about sleep. And sometimes when I speak to my coaching clients, they normally, I mean, sometimes it's slower for others, and I'm not pretending it's immediate, but for me, as I took the step away and took a break, one of the first things I really noticed coming back to was my sleep. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I was mostly a beer drinker. I enjoyed a glass of red, but I always knew that if I'd go on a long flight, I'd go, oh, I'll have a red wine because that will knock me out for the flight, and I'll know that I'll have a decent kip on the plane, and I'll feel refreshed at the other end. But what actually happens, you step off the plane at the other end, you're massively dehydrated because you had a glass of red wine. The air conditioning, you've not been sleeping properly because what you're doing is just getting knocked out, really, and you're not going into that deep restorative REM sleep that actually refreshes you and helps. And you wake up what you think you've had a night's sleep, and you spend the rest of the day trying to work out why you're so bloody tired. Because and the same could be said for going out for a few beers after work. It eats into that next day.
Do you know what? When you really made me think there when you spoke about, drinking on flights. I remember what I used to do. I used to have this kind of strategy, this alcohol strategy whenever I'd be on a flight where, you're always trying to get as much booze as you can off off the cabin crew. Like, oh, could I have two of those, please? Ready for, and then, literally I'd wait an hour, and then after they'd served the meal, I'd then go to the back of the plane and speak to a different different cab member of cabin crew who hadn't served me, and be like, oh, could I possibly just have one more bit? And I used to basically just store it all up. So I'd get as many drinks as I could. I'd store it all up, and then I literally would just like drink it all in about 15 minutes.
Yeah,
In my head, I was trying to get the maximum amount of bang for my buck from
yeah,
the alcohol I could get. And yeah, I look at it now and think, Jesus Christ,
yeah,
it's terrible.
yeah,
And you're right, you'd rock up on your holiday, and I always used to sort of think that, if I'm on a flight, I'll get the most amount of alcohol as I can, and that'll knock me out, and then I'll sleep for like sort of 6 hours. But all that would happen was I just end up getting really pissed, and I wouldn't
yeah,
sleep at all, and I'd be at the baggage carousel, just like hammered and feeling absolutely terrible. And
yeah,
it's because alcohol affects you so much more because of the altitude. I think it's because of the altitude. I'm not an expert on that by any means, but you definitely feel effects of alcohol far greater on a flight. And oh God, the amount of arguments I get into with with Chris, my wife, oh, just because I've just been boozing on the flight and then just be a complete mess when you have to come and go through customs and pick up all the bags and all this. And oh God, so glad I don't have to do that anymore.
You'd be, I'd always be the one sitting there. Well, firstly, you'd be, after you've had that first drink that comes around, you'd be looking to see who's the first person on the plane that's going to push the hostess button and request another drink. And that's kind of green light for you to do the same. And then after that, after you've had a couple, where do we spend half our time on the fly? You spend half the time queuing for the bloody toilet because because
Yeah.
you've been knocking back the beers on the plane. But you're right, you get off ready to start your well-deserved holiday already on the back foot. And yeah, so it's so true. And the sleep side of it is just, yeah, once you then take that out of the equation, once you take alcohol out of the equation, I took it out so that I could actually get training. And so I would want to be up and in the pool by 6 o'clock in the morning and be back by 7:30 to take the kids to school. And I just wouldn't be able to do that after even one glass of wine in an evening. But I now, there's other supplements I take around for my sleeping. Magnesium particularly works really well for me. But actually, I go to bed quite late. I sleep probably 6.5 hours. I know it should be more. But when I
Mhm.
glance down at my morning report I get on my Garmin, it's telling me that like 80% of my sleep has been REM sleep and restorative sleep. So I wake up. I've always been an early riser. I take that from my dad. He was always the same. But I'll wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. But I'll come downstairs feeling fully refreshed and ready to tackle the day, and quite often get a lot of work done between 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning while the kids are still in bed, and start the day on the forefront and start the day pushing forward, which is just gives you again such a level of achievement, and you start the day in the right way.
Yeah, you're so right. I think anyone who's listening to this podcast who's thinking about taking a break from alcohol, who's sober curious, I would just say to you, if nothing else convinces you to take that step, then it should be sleep. Because if you were like us, and you drank for many, many years and you've never taken a proper break from alcohol, I can absolutely reassure you that you have no concept how much better sleep is. It is absolutely incomparable. For some people it takes a few weeks, and I've definitely had clients that have probably not really seen the sleep benefits until maybe a month in. And perhaps at the beginning I've been saying, "Oh yeah, sleep's amazing. You're going to sleep brilliantly." And they're like, "Yeah, it's not happening." Sometimes it takes a few weeks. It's
Mm,
sometimes one of the last things that happen. But when it does, you just have got no idea how different it is and how much better you're going to feel. And I think nowadays, where a lot of people have got, fitness trackers, I've got a Garmin as well. You have the data there on your wrist, and you can see it. It is not, it's not conjecture. It's not my opinion or your opinion. It's there on your wrist, and you can compare how different it is. And again, I think once you see that data, you really realize how much different it is because, alcohol sedates you. It does not put you to sleep. Sedation is not the same as sleep. And he spoke about REM sleep there, and that's the sleep that counts. That's the restorative sleep. And one point I really wanted to make actually is there is a real link between stress and sleep from an alcohol perspective, in that what is happening when we don't get sufficient REM sleep is our stress naturally goes up, because one of the functions of deep sleep and REM sleep is to help us problem solve from the previous day. So if you go to sleep with, you know, a problem that you've got, like, a minor work issue or just general problems that kind of just crop up as part of normal, colliding with life, when we go to sleep and we get into deep restorative sleep, our subconscious problem solves from the previous day. And if you're not getting into REM sleep, you're waking up the next day and you've still got all these problems and all these issues that your brain hasn't been able to work on for you whilst you're asleep. And those problems start to stagnate and they start to accumulate. And that's when you get bogged down with all this, oh my God, I've got so many issues going on, so many problems, because you're denying yourself REM sleep. It's critical for that mental cleansing that we go through. And I just don't think that people really have an awareness of this because when when you when you're when you've been drinking and you just pass out and you're sedated, you're just in light sleep all the time. And again, you can see this when you look at fitness sports trackers. You can see it on your Garmin, you can see it on Whoop, and you can see the time that's spent in light sleep as opposed to REM and deep sleep. And it's leading to stress because it's making you less emotionally resilient because you're not processing just the normal problems that come along during life. I mean, even when you have really significant issues in life, and I had a bit of a health crisis a year ago that I had to kind of rationalize and get my head around. And it took me about a week to kind of come to terms with it. I'm okay now, and I've moved past it, but it took me a week or so of trying to sort of digest this news. And I think had I been drinking, I would have fallen to pieces because
Mm.
I hadn't had that time to reflect on it, and because I wasn't, wasn't sleeping properly when I was drinking. I thought I was, I thought, yeah, I sleep fine. But until you've got that comparison, you have no idea how much different sleep is when you're alcohol free. And I just think it sits right at the top of the pile in terms of benefits. It just makes you feel amazing when you sleep well every night.
You're so right, and it's I heard a really good way of putting that in kind of layman's terms is really our brains are when we sleep are kind of like filing cabinets. So if you picture like a messy desk, that's kind of how you're kind of going to bed, all your paperwork out on the desk, this, that, and the other. When you go into that deep REM sleep, everything's getting filed into the right place and tidied up and made neat and tidy and put in some kind of order. And that's what happens when we're in that deep sleep. When we don't achieve that deep sleep, the desk just remains a little bit messy and
I
things are
love that.
scattered around. And actually, that's the way it works. And you gave an example there. I've had an exactly the same thing, like a lived example for me this year is, 2 months ago, I've got made redundant from a 35-year career. And I've been able to, it's been tough and not knowing where the next full paycheck's really coming from has been difficult. But I've processed that in a way, and I absolutely put this down to the clarity, mostly through the sleep and the rest that I get and being able to approach things with a clear head, less stressed. What would I have done 4 years ago? I'd have just headed straight down the pub, pushed it down the line, and dealt with it further down the line. But on this occasion, I thought, right, okay, I've got a huge opportunity here to grow a business, help other people to achieve the same thing, and actually do what I want to do for myself and for others, and achieve that job. And I've been getting up at 6 o'clock every morning, working on my business plan, working on my putting my business together, and actually thinking of this as a massive opportunity. And I totally put that down to the organization of having a clear head, sleeping, and all these things. It just things seem a lot clearer with less noise. And that's probably 4 years of cumulative decent sleep.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
it
I
was
think
pretty quick it happened to me.
yeah, you're right. That compounding effect, of when you first take a break, even a month in, you start to feel great because you've had a month of not drinking. But imagine that 3, 4, 5 years in, that compounding effect every day, good sleep, good sleep, good sleep. And we sleep for a third of our lives, right? So
I'm
what
going
does
to slightly interrupt you there, and the reason that I'm thinking of the compounding effect of what 30 years of poor sleep has brought to us.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, 100%. It's like it's a vicious circle versus a virtuous circle.
Yeah.
That's what, I've spoken about it before, this idea of like alcohol being the big domino. Once you push over the big domino, it has this cascade effect of positive, positive outcomes. And it's the same in reverse. If you've got that big domino of alcohol, it's affecting everything. It's affecting sleep. That's then creating more stress. That means you're then more depressed. That means you're less likely to exercise. Da, 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 da. And it's this huge cascade effect. Whereas when you remove it, but once alcohol's gone, sleep resets over the course of a few weeks, and then you just start to feel amazing. And once you start to sleep well, your mental health is going to improve. It is. It's so health is, mental health and sleep are so closely related because of the stress, element, and then, it affects your diet, it affects your exercise, all of these things. And we sleep for a third of our lives. You don't need any more evidence of how important it is, the fact that we do that. Evolution would have eradicated sleep or reduced the amount of time we do it if it wasn't incredibly beneficial for us. But even until very, very recently, we've kind of lived in a culture where sleep's kind of deprioritized, like sleep's for wimps. And,
Yeah.
you mentioned it, I think, a few weeks ago about,
I'll
play hard.
sleep when I'm dead.
yeah, sleep when I'm dead. And it's just absolute nonsense. You know, when people we're starting to realize how important sleep is, but I generally don't think that people, just from people I talk to, I generally do not think people have an awareness of the impact that alcohol is having on sleep. I don't think there's a generally a widespread understanding of just quite how devastating it is to our sleep because
Mm,
we don't recognize the difference between sleep and sedation. And again, it all depends on what your level is. You know, people say it all of the time, yeah, I sleep absolutely fine. Yeah, but compared to what? If you've never taken a break from alcohol in 20 or 30 years, you have no basis for comparison.
yeah,
And that's the difference.
yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I'm hitting 90 sleep scores night in, night out, week in, week out, year in, year out. And I got so much energy as a result of it, and I know you have as well.
That's it. Exactly it. You touched upon kind of, and I'm sure it's a whole other episode, but kind of to briefly kind of skip on to the effects on mental health and how alcohol can affect that. What's your feelings towards that? And I know it's a big subject, and I'm cautious of opening a massive can of worms halfway through a pod, but what's your
Well,
experience of that?
I mean, I'm deeply passionate about alcohol and mental health because, you know, I believe certainly within corporate culture, I think there is an enormous open goal with regards to middle lane drinking and and mental health because every company in the world will wave the flags about how fantastic they are about supporting their staff with mental health initiatives, and and mental health, of course, is incredibly important. But alcohol gets completely ignored unless you are quote unquote an alcoholic, which
Yeah,
is 1% of the adult population. It's less than 500,000 people in this country. So there tends to be something for this kind of emergency situation where, you know, people have got, you know, alcohol dependent, but yet we completely ignore people who are drinking modest amounts. And I'm talking about when I say middle lane drinker, you know what I mean by middle lane drinker. It's, you know, it's not alcohol free, but it's also not dependent. It's this area in the middle, this grey area, you know, where people are maybe drinking, you know, a couple of beers in the evening or a glass of wine with dinner. But that the you know the impact that that is having on people's sleep and on their mental health, you know, is just completely ignored. And I just
yeah,
think it's a huge, huge miss, particularly for organizations and for people, because it goes back to what I was saying a minute ago. If you're not sleeping well because you're having a few drinks, then you are going to be more stressed. You know, it's increasing the amount of cortisol in your system, which is the stress hormone.
yeah,
Uh, and the less we sleep, you know, the less we're able to deal with, you know, the problems I've talked about, you know, a moment ago. So yeah, they're all linked. You know, sleep, mental health, stress, they all go together. And of course, alcohol is a well-established driver of anxiety, of depression, and of stress. So of course, it's connected to mental health. You know, and way beyond problem drinking, just regular modest drinking, you know, between anything more than 10 units a week, it's going to be having an effect on your mental health.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm just scanning across, and I looked at some statistics before we started the pod today, just regarding this, and some of them are really quite staggering. It's like people who drink more than 14 units a week are 20% more likely to experience depression.
Yeah, well, you spoke about there about 14 units a week, so that's obviously
That's
that is the UK
yeah,
government's recommended weekly you know, intake, which is actually an entirely arbitrary number because
yeah,
if you go to a different country, that it changes you know, massively.
exactly.
You know, in Canada it's 3 units a week, in the UK it's 14, in America it's 24. So it depends on where you live. But if you
Exactly.
actually look at middle lane drinking purely on the basis of people drinking more than 14 units a week, the numbers are quite staggering. It's 23% of the adult population drink more than 40 units a week, and that's 12 million people.
There
So
you go.
even if you look at middle lane drinking in a bit more of a targeted way, it's 12 million people, and that's a huge amount.
Yeah,
You know that we're talking about here. That you know who having having that increased stress, having that mental health impact. And it's yeah, it's a big blind spot. I think it's just tolerated and accepted. And the other thing you got to look at with these sort of statistics that I've just quoted, this 12 million people, 23%. This is based on what people are reporting they're drinking. So
mm,
that is an absolute rock bottom number. Because if you go to
Yeah,
the doctors or if if you're asked about how much you drink, people will
we
always
lie.
they'll always lie. They'll always lowball
Yeah,
it. So the
yeah.
numbers are way more than this.
That's exactly right, and that because and equally that is from NHS. That's an NHS statistic. But
Yeah.
I've got
Well,
one
this
here from the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism in 2020. Heavy drinkers are 3 times more likely to experience major depression than non-drinkers. And now that I've stepped away for it for over 4 years, I definitely fell into a heavy drinker category. Was I physically dependent? No. Was I, but I was most definitely a heavy drinker, and
Mm.
that's really concerning. Yeah, it's the lists go on and on, and there's definitely a whole other subject to discuss with this. But it's I think once you start to look at those kind of statistics, it's really quite worrying and really quite concerning.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's I did. What do you think though in terms of people's awareness though of alcohol and and the mental health and the stress aspects? Do you think it's something that do people recognize, or just with the people that you speak to, do you find that there's generally a lack of awareness around
Um,
stress?
I think I think people recognize. I think the younger generation are recognizing it. I have some coaching clients that have come through that are that little bit younger, and they're actually addressing their alcohol content consumption because of their mental health.
Mm,
So yes, I think it's being recognized. Is it being recognized in my age demographic? I don't think so. Or it's maybe not being spoken about as much. So it's not necessarily that it's not being recognized, but I think mental health is so much more at the forefront of conversation nowadays in the younger generation that actually maybe it's a case that it's being spoken about more rather than actually being addressed.
mm. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. I think we'll need to do a pod at some point in the future on that kind of generational divide around alcohol because yeah, it comes up a lot, about how under 25s are drinking significantly less than over 50s, for example, which obviously is our generation. But yeah,
Yeah,
there's a huge shift there. And from what I read, I don't think anyone can conclusively say where this has come from, but I think mental health is one of the main mental health awareness within a younger generation, I think, is certainly one of the key drivers for it. Because we're pretty close in age. When I went to school, mental health was not even a term that existed. I
yeah,
was at school. I don't know. I don't actually know when I first heard the term mental health, but it certainly wasn't when I was growing up.
yeah,
It just wasn't a thing. Whereas
yeah,
now it's huge,
yeah,
and rightly so.
yeah.
Rightly so. But we're just there's just this gap which alcohol doesn't fit into. I think as soon as you mention alcohol, their mind immediately goes to alcoholic.
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
is this archaic idea of, well, why would you stop drinking unless you had a problem? We've spoken about this before. It happens all the time. Whenever I meet new people, if it's in a social situation, they're like, "What are you drinking?" I'm like, "I don't actually drink," and they're like, you can see in their heads that they're thinking, "All right, you're a bit of a boozer, or alcoholic, were you?" You can
mm,
see. I don't know. Maybe that's my own paranoia about the
no,
situation, but I still think, I don't, that's certainly what I would have thought when I was drinking. If I'd found somebody who didn't drink, I'd think, "Oh, right, okay, they're a recovering alcoholic." Not that
yeah.
they've made a conscious choice for better health, more energy, better sleep, all of these great things that we speak about. Why wouldn't you want to go alcohol free? The benefits are incredible.
Well, you're saying that, and I'm looking, and coming away from the downsides of drinking, I'm looking at some of the positive stats on the back of going alcohol free, and to kind of skip across some of those, covering what we've covered during this pod, like within 7 to 10 days of alcohol free, REM sleep rebounds significantly, improving memory and focus and emotional regulation. That's from the Sleep Foundation 2021. People report 40% improvement in sleep quality within the first month of going alcohol free. That's from Alcohol Change UK in 2022. And this one, 93% of participants in Dry January studied a reported sense of achievement and increased self-confidence after completing 1 month. And that's the University of Sussex. So, there's as many stats for the positive benefits of taking a break as there are about the negative sides of not doing so.
But you know what? You just touched on it there, and people who do dry January or take a month off, they do start to experience some of these benefits, and sleep tends to come quite late in the month.
Mm,
A lot of people it tends to be sort of week 3, week 4, and yet so they people then hit that 28 days, they've done dry January, and they're like, right, straight back to it. And well, I'm not going to say that I don't get that because I do understand exactly why that happens because people are focusing on what they think they're losing as opposed to what they're gaining.
Yeah,
But one of the key drivers of my coaching is helping people focus on forget about what you think you're losing and focus on what you're gaining. And that mindset shift from well, it's growth mindset basically
yeah,
of the gains as opposed to the losses is what makes the difference. And I think this
yeah,
is where you don't have to work with a coach, but speaking with somebody else who can help you reflect on all of those gains and focus your attention on all these wonderful things that are happening to you rather than, oh, why can't I have a glass of wine? Why can't I go to the pub? I can do at the end of the month. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't
mm,
work in the longer term. You just feel
yeah.
that you're depriving yourself.
Yeah, you touched upon it before about after 60 to 90 days, you've had enough experience of what life can throw at you and the shit that life can throw at you to actually understand and
Yeah.
make a conscious decision at the end of it. And I think it serves a purpose. I
But you
think that,
have to reflect on it. You have to recognize it and
yeah,
see it. It's one of the things that my clients do is journal, and something that
yeah,
I've done a lot over the last year or so is just journal. So and it doesn't have to be War and Peace. This isn't about dear diary, I got beat up again at school because the other girls at school realized that I was writing a diary. It's not about that. It's just, get up in the morning, have a coffee, just literally with 2 or 3 sentences. Okay, how am I feeling? How do I feel myself? What's my energy levels like today? How well did I sleep last night? And being mindful and noticing about what's
mm,
happening physiologically when you're not drinking and actually spotting, oh, yeah, actually, I feel pretty energized this morning. Oh, I did have a good night's sleep. And just noting these things down
yeah,
because writing it down reinforces it in your mind and helps you remember and helps you focus on what's going on and what's positive. And those sort of things make such a big difference, really noticing. Because if you just let it all happen, you don't really tend to pay a whole great deal of attention because in your brain you're spending all the time thinking about, I wish I could have a beer. This sucks because I can't have a drink. But forget that. Put that to one side. Focus on what you're gaining, and it just grows day in day out. It's brilliant.
yeah. I think you almost think of it as scribbling rather than journaling. I think journaling has
Yeah.
this
Chuck it away
connotation
afterwards.
that
Chuck
this
it in the bin.
yeah, it has this connotation of dear diary,
No, 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 not
I
at all.
always looked at it like that, and I do journal. I wish I journaled more, and I it's something I'm really kind of tasking myself to do a lot more because the benefits are huge. It's just getting those thoughts out of your head and onto paper. Even if you screw up that piece of paper and throw it in the bin, or even, I know my phone has a journaling app on it, and that's an iPhone. It's built in, so you've got the journal app. It's got your Face ID. It's perfect, totally um, private and confidential. You can write whatever you like on it, and it's lovely. Sometimes those opportunities it prompts you to write that journal down, and I think you're right. It's just noticing those moments, noticing those little wins, looking at those rather than focusing on when the month's up. And we'll as the year comes to a close, I'm sure we will most definitely be running a dry January special.
For
But
sure.
yeah, so it is focusing on those things. It's focusing on the positives and that's
Well, I'm going to do another quick plug here, actually. And now you've come to that. It's a moment. I've actually got a journal on my website, which people can use, and it has 8 different prompts. It's called the Control Reset Journal, and yeah, it basically gives people an idea of what should I write about every day. And you're absolutely spot on. You don't have to write the same thing every day. You don't even have to write every day.
yeah.
It doesn't need to be something that becomes burdensome. It just should just be a quick reflection on what's happening and how you're feeling. Um,
Mm,
and no, and really the most important thing is to focus on the positives. That you can journal in a way where you unburden yourself and you write down all the shit that's in your head that you want to get out, and that's a very positive tool as well. But the journaling I'm talking about is a gratitude practice. It's focusing on what's good and remembering that because we naturally are risk adverse as a species, and we focus on what we don't have as opposed to what we do have. We tend to in terms of how we perceive losses to be much worse than gains. So if you got given £1,000 but you lost £100, you tend to focus more on what you're losing rather than what you're gaining. It's not a very good example, but you kind of get what I mean.
mm, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Great, great. Well, I mean, there's been a lot to chat through. There's been a lot, and like you say, I think pretty
as
much
always.
it's been a I think, as you say, there's a big opportunity, I think, to probably discuss that in a little bit more detail on an upcoming podcast. But it's been it's been good catching up and chatting through some more subjects and getting back from holiday and getting back into it and looking forward to kind of growing this further and chatting more as we go along. And
Yeah, I think you mentioned it at the beginning there, but really sort of key just to sort of say that, over the next kind of 4 to 5 weeks, we've got a lot of guests lined up, people coming on the pod, some really inspirational people that we're super excited to interview, and get into the debate about alcohol free. And yeah, it's going to be a really interesting few months, I think. I can't wait to bring these new people on.
exactly. So before we go, just remind us, James, where can people find you and your services?
Yeah, so I'm James Lloyd. I post every day on LinkedIn, loads of alcohol-free content, loads of motivation. I also have a website, which is alcoholfreecoach.com. As I mentioned earlier, I'm currently running a series of videos at the moment that I'm dropping one every week, and it's called Alcohol and Your Brain: How to Master Your Mindset. And it's all about the neuroscience. It's all about understanding what is going on in the brain and the body around booze. And it's all completely free. You can find that by going to the free resources section of my website. And yeah, I welcome anyone into the sober sphere. How
Awesome,
about you, Steve?
awesome.
People find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. You can either search my name, Steve Smith, or Sober Brilliant, which is my business name. You can search me on there and find me on there. I post on there. You can jump onto all my links and find out all my content on there. I have an ebook called "Is Alcohol Really My Friend?" which you can download from my website. I also run a 14-day alcohol-free challenge, so you can sign up to that, and in which case you will get a 10-minute video from me each day talking you through 14 days of alcohol-free glory and help you through that if you want to dip your toe into alcohol-free lifestyle. But you can find me on there, and yeah, we will be back next week with another sizzling edition of the alcohol-free revolution. Don't know why I came up with the word sizzling there, but I just thought I'd throw it in there. Why not?
Hot
So
start.
yeah, I hope you have a great week and look forward to catching up again next week. And yeah,
You
anything
too.
you want to add? Yeah,
Thanks, mate. Thanks, everyone. Speak to you
thanks very
soon.
much. See
Bye
you
bye.
soon. Take care. Bye bye.